I mean, like talk about IBM. Yeah, like, oh yeah, IBM helped, Germany basically run the genocide machine much more efficiently. And yet here you have Google involved in essentially, yeah, like, doing AI targeting, picking targets to kill in Gaza, like, and that's like that's some guy in Palo Alto, taking his like e-bike to work, sitting in a cubicle, having his like fair trade coffee, dropping off his kids at some private school, like a Montessori school or something, and then like sitting down and like coding on this shit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is Dispatches. The people who control our digital lives, our speech, our access to information, our basic ability to function in society aren't just billionaires. They're unelected oligarchs with fascist tendencies who've embedded themselves into the state and now help shape its most violent policies. Elon Musk owns the digital public square and works hand in hand with the Pentagon. Peter Thiel's companies build tools for ICE and predictive policing. Mark Zuckerberg purged DEI and aligned Meta with right-wing power. These men don't just profit from empire, they're helping design the infrastructure for it. And now, with the rise of AI, they're building the tools to automate repression, eliminate labor, and suppress dissent, while marketing it as efficiency. In Gaza, big tech is helping test out this future with AI-generated kill lists, algorithmic surveillance, and mass murder as a beta test for global control. Naomi Klein calls it end times fascism, when elites have given up on saving the planet and are constructing bunker societies for themselves, powered by AI and guarded by digital walls, while the rest of us are left to survive in Gaza-like zones of exclusion. So how did we get here, and what comes next? Joining me today to discuss all of this and more is Yasha Levine, journalist and author of Surveillance Valley, The Secret Military History of the Internet. He's one of the first to trace how the internet was never a tool for liberation, but a weapon for counterinsurgency. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And as always, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. And if you appreciate this show, you can also donate below on YouTube. Yasha, welcome to Dispatches.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. I'm excited to have you on. I've been wanting to for a while. And I don't know if you know this, but you often get shout outs. Especially these days. Yeah, because you wrote Surveillance Valley, which has always been a very important book. But I think now it's like people are kind of looking back to it because that kind of rise of the big tech oligarchs that's been happening for a very long time is really in our faces now, especially with Elon Musk, being sort of like shadow president, though it kind of seems like he's been sidelined a little bit these days, but we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah.
But, I guess.
He's got too much stuff going on.
Yeah, well, he's got a lot of kids to raise. So, he's a busy guy. But, in your book, Surveillance Valley, you detailed how the internet was born out of Pentagon counterinsurgency, which is really important to understand. But it's evolved so much now, right? We're in this kind of like new phase where billionaires like Elon Musk, like the Peter Thiels of the world, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Jeff Bezos, they're not just like building platforms for surveillance, they're actually embedding themselves. And they always kind of have been embedded in the levers of government, but I think it's more obvious now. So I'm curious, what kind of power structure are we dealing with here? Is this a new form of state corporate fascism, or this kind of logical outcome of the national security state meets the internet? And I'll let you take that where you want to. Maybe you even want to talk a little bit about the internet with regards to that.
It's interesting. I feel like I don't think that we're seeing something spectacularly new. I just think that on some level, the internet as an industry, as like a business group, has come of age, right? It's not that old, Mark Zuckerberg is a young guy still, he's not an old man. So if you think about like the internet in terms of, Mark Zuckerberg's age, in terms of just the commercial internet, like the kind of internet that's intertwined completely with our lives now. It's not that much older than Facebook. I mean, the internet really goes back to the late 1960s and early 1970s, and we can get into the history a little bit of it later, and then it began to be commercialized really in the late 80s, and really the early 90s is when the internet really hit kind of, people in their homes, and people had like AOL and all these kind of, old school internet service providers that people were using in the 90s. But really, it was almost like kind of a sideshow. And when it really started kind of intertwining itself as with Google, with Facebook, with the iPhone, with the Android phone, right? Like these things then suddenly became, you can't let go of your cell phone anymore. Like it's so intertwined with modern life. And in fact, my wife, Yevgenia, she is really, she just wanted to like ditch her smartphone. And she tried, to get one of those dumb phones, and she tried it for a few weeks. But, for instance, being a parent, and kind of having to kind of be available and having responsibilities and things like that. And, having to like navigate New York City, it's like the phone has become so central to it. Like it's very difficult to exist without it. You really have to make an effort, and it becomes actually a lot harder to function without it, because everything has been kind of built around it now. But that's fairly recent, right? And so these guys that are now, back Trump, and have kind of come to the front stage almost of American politics, isn't because they're, developing, I think, a new form of corporate fascism. I think this kind of corporate fascism has existed in America really through basically the 20th century, in various forms, and the intertwining of corporate interests, military interests, military industrial, interests with Washington, D.C. It's not a new thing, but we're shocked, I think, because these guys had been uncomfortable being in the spotlight until now. And I think that's what it is. We're kind of seeing the maturation of it. So that's my take on it. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But that's my sense of it.
Wow, how humble of you.
I've learned to be humble as I'm getting older. It's good. It's good practice.
Good to be. It is good to be humble. But I do want to ask you to maybe like give us a sort of reminder, or for those who maybe don't know, because the roots of the sort of evolution of technology that we're witnessing now come from the internet, right? And
Yeah.
There's kind of a libertarianism, I feel like mixed into all of that, or an idea of libertarianism, right? Like the internet, was supposed to be this like free marketplace of ideas kind of place that was going to like democratize the world. And that's also like what tech is supposed to do. But you see what it means when all of that is wrapped up with capitalism and then imperialism.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is like the uber imperialist technology. I mean, I think this is what, I can give a little spiel on like the history of it really quickly. I mean, because I think a lot of people really don't buy it as much anymore, but really even like during the Obama years, people were really wedded to this idea of the internet being this democratic technology, this almost utopian technology. It connects the world. It makes the world like united. You can talk to people, anywhere. It sort of allows people to organize. You can have the Arab Spring, kind of emerge democratically, and topple these, authoritarian regimes, or not topple them. But so there was this really, you had these Twitter revolutions and things like that. People were really wedded to it, and part of that kind of utopian thinking about the internet really comes out of really the 80s and the 90s, when a lot of these kind of companies emerged and started to sell their services to people. So it was always wrapped up, like Apple computers, for instance, had this infamous ad for the Apple computer, where essentially it's this kind of, very pretty woman kind of running with this kind of sledgehammer, and shattering this kind of Big Brother screen that's sort of controlling and making people zombies. And this was supposed to be Apple Computer. It was like fighting authoritarianism. It's empowering the individual. It's kind of cool. It's like has this 80s kind of hotness to it. And so that was the image that Apple actually pioneered, with its marketing campaigns, and it really kind of took off. And a lot of people were invested in selling the internet as this utopian democratic tool that would bypass the governments, and let's say would allow the emergence of, in the 90s, you'd have like Wired magazine, publishing stories all the time about the emergence of a global democracy, right, where you'd have people wouldn't need to do these old-fashioned voting through, the count in the county that's organizes these things, let's say in America, and then the state on the state level, and then on a federal level. You could just have a democracy on a global scale where people would just vote through the internet and agree on things through the internet. Like, we're debating things now, so we'd have these debates and then people vote on things. So you'd almost have this. It was a utopian idea. It's kind of sounds kind of nice in a way, right? I mean, it would be kind of cool if that actually could happen, where there was true egalitarianism and true democracy, and there would be the erasure of national borders, and with it, I guess, the erasure of kind of nationalist identity and things like that. That are actually kind of a problematic force in the world. As we're seeing in Israel, as like the prime example of sort of nationalism taken to its extreme sort of logical conclusion, right? But, that's sort of a recent thing. The history of the internet is a little bit more interesting than that, because it really comes out of the Vietnam War in America, America's role in the Vietnam War. Back then, so this was like, the 1960s and the 1970s, America had already developed this computer technology during World War II, like these sort of huge, really, in our terms, very, very weak, very underpowered computers, but they were massive, and they were, developed for military uses during World War II, and then after World War II, these first kind of supercomputers back then were installed to provide early warning radar systems for America. What became NORAD. It's sort of like the, a kind of just radar system that watches America's skies and watches them specifically for Soviet airplane that Americans, were worried that the Soviet Union had developed the atomic bomb. It was going to send a bunch of bombers into America and, bomb America with nuclear bombs. So that was the system. And then later on, when the Soviet Union developed intercontinental missiles and things like that, they could send a missile. This system is watching the sky 24 hours a day. It's connected to like missile installations that could intercept threats, like that could, take out enemy aircraft, it could intercept enemy missiles, scramble jets, and all these things. So it was like this nationwide computer network, surveillance network, but that was primarily focused on watching the sky, right? And so, and the computer technology existed for that, but it was very specialized. It was very, it had to be built for a very specific purpose. It was very expensive. And so, like, American sort of military planners and the people who were running kind of the foreign policy apparatus and who were acquainted with this emerging not internet, but computer technology, they started having ideas, about the future. They're saying, well, if we can do this for the sky, why can't we in the future do this for human societies, right? Like, why can't we watch a society, a people, a political movement in real time, so that we can better understand the world, so the world is more transparent to us, and so we can become more effective managers of society. So it was like, there was also like a utopian, and some people had a utopian kind of aspect to it. They were like, they believed that, in technocratic rule, that these sort of technocrats who were running the world, this American empire, had the best interests of humanity at heart. They wanted what's best for everyone. And so, and they saw, like, wars as something that had to be done. It was unnecessary. It had to be done because there was misunderstanding, because people couldn't come to an agreement, because the technocratic planners didn't really know what those people wanted. If they knew what those people who were rebelling, let's say against America or against an American-backed regime, let's say like in South Vietnam, they could be more, kinder and softer, because it wouldn't have to devolve to fighting, right? So there was a kind of an almost like a noblesse oblige kind of way of thinking about things. Like, we want what's best for the world, and we just don't have the tools, and computers might be able to give us the tools. I mean, so this is at a point where, nothing like a personal computer existed, nothing like, it didn't exist. So you'd have to be specifically trained as a computer technician to feed, questions into these computers that would give you answers. So these were like really complex kind of calculating machines. And so there was an effort in the this sort of agency that was created by the Kennedy administration to kind of spearhead counterinsurgency efforts in Vietnam to develop new weapons that would help fight kind of the smaller scale wars where you're not fighting against a traditional army like with tanks and like formations. You're fighting against people embedded in the civilian populations, and really the civilian and a combatant. There, it's not even clear where the line is. And so, the Kennedy administration, threw money at sort of these new counterinsurgency efforts, which included the development of drones, early drones back then, new kinds of machine guns that could be used in the jungle that were lighter to carry, like all sorts of like weapons technologies that could fight this insurgency in Vietnam. And part of that effort was to develop information technology that could allow sort of these social scientists that were working for the military or the part of the military effort in Vietnam, that was collecting data on the different tribes in Vietnam, the different kind of mindsets that people had, what they wanted out of life, why were some rebelling against this U.S.-backed government, why some weren't rebelling, what could we do to buy their allegiance, so there was like a lot of studies going on. And so the idea was that, well, we have all this data, we don't know what to do with it. Let's develop some technologies that we could actually ingest this data, that someone without training could actually use a computer to like look at things like like something as basic as like an Excel spreadsheet or something. It didn't exist back then, right? So all these technologies and basically everything that we use now, this browser, the internet, the actual the graphical user interfaces on our on your computer, on your phone, all of these things kind of came out of that effort by the Advanced Projects Research Agency, as it was called. Right now it's called the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. And out of that effort really came the personal computer, and came the backbone of the internet that we still use today. I mean, it hasn't really changed the technology at all since then. Yeah, and so
It's great.
Yeah, go ahead, because I can go
No,
on
no,
forever.
no, I was just gonna say it's crazy when you think about it. It's like literally all these things that we use to like make our lives easier are tools that were developed by the Pentagon. Like that's insane. That's actually insane.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, I mean, it is. It's interesting. I mean, and so this is why I wrote this book. Not really. I knew everyone kind of knows that the Advanced Research Projects Agency sort of funded the early internet, but it's sort of usually the kind of the story or the kind of the mainstream histories that you get are like, oh, it was only peripherally connected to to the military. Actually, it was just these weirdos in Stanford and MIT who had long hair, who were like smoking pot, who were reading Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. Like, and they were, just tinkering with computers. There were these mad geniuses and all this stuff. And then of course, then they saw how amazing this technology was, and then companies commercialized it and brought it to the masses. That's part of the story, and it's partially true, but they were all under military contracts doing that. And so the question is, why was the military interested in funding this? At the same time, at exactly the same time, and in exactly the same institutions that were also involved in counterinsurgency efforts in the war in Vietnam. And so when I dug into this history that had only kind of been sort of hinted at in other histories of the internet, I mean, there was this whole trove of information that showed a total connection and overlapping of the structures that were involved in the counterinsurgency in Vietnam and the development of internet technologies back home. And what's interesting about it, almost immediately when the creation of this sort of national network came online, the early internet, it was called the ARPANET. It was used as to kind of, it's not clear exactly what was done with this data, but it was used to ingest surveillance files that the military had collected on anti-war protesters, on anyone who was opposing the Vietnam War. The military had been running this illegal operation, spying. So it's the U.S. military spying domestically on people in America, right? I mean, basically, they had infiltrated pretty much every anti-war protest group, down to like the local, like, I don't know, church group where just some old ladies were meeting and cooking and baking cookies and things like that. I mean, literally it was like one of the biggest surveillance programs in American history, it was deemed illegal by Congress, actually, because there are all these hearings, and the military was told to destroy all these files because they were illegally, collected. They had been actually tapping the phones of members of Congress. They were like, the military created these like fake news, basically, like networks where these guys would come out. They're like a TV crew, right, with a van and all this stuff, and they would take interviews, and they would interview people, but all that stuff would be sent right directly back to the Pentagon. Anyway, so there was this massive surveillance program, and some of those files were immediately used by through this, basically to share them among, like, on a national level, because back until then, these files, yes, they were collected, but they were basically sitting in like, as paper files in boxes, right? So you can collect all the information that you want, right? But unless you can sort of call it up immediately or like make it useful, it's useless. It's just junk. It's just garbage, pretty much. And so
yeah,
I think that's what a lot of the internet and in this internet based kind of data sharing technology that was created was driven in part by that, because the U.S. government was sitting on all these files and all these surveillance files and all these things, and it couldn't really do anything with them because they were on microfilm and paper format. And so if you can digitize it, right? If you can ingest it into this network, if you can make it accessible to people who it didn't even really have like personal computers back then because they were so expensive, but you'd have like terminals. I don't know if you've ever seen those things, but like it's basically connected to a very big computer, but it's just a screen, with like a keyboard. And so there are these terminals that were set up in the Pentagon and the CIA and FBI. So it was immediately like utilized, right? So something that was developed for counterinsurgency, right, abroad in Vietnam was immediately utilized for domestic political purposes, right? And this is before the internet was commercialized, right? So there was still a federally Pentagon funded project, and then there's in the 80s and the 90s, that network became privatized in this kind of complicated process that essentially transferred assets to several large, private firms. And that was the beginning of the commercial privatized internet that we all use today. So,
if you have a conscience, it's unbearable to be plugged into the corporate media machine right now. These outlets are accomplices in genocide, running cover for the war machine. Breakthrough has become the go-to outlet for those who want something different. But the funds we've used to start this platform are starting to run out. We'd never dream of turning to mainstream corporate funding. So we're turning to you. Become a patron. For as little as $5 a month, you can become an essential part of our fight to not just break through the mainstream media, but create something that can challenge it. We have to become completely viewer supported, or this platform we've built could go away. Don't just watch us, join us. Yeah, no, and that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk about next here. And that is that, this thing that was supposed to, aside from the actual reality of the story you just gave, that the utopian idea was the internet's supposed to democratize information. It's supposed to make give everybody a voice while also making other things accessible. But now what we have is that it mixed in with that sort of commercialization that you're talking about is you've got essentially the means of communication in the hands of very few people who have these algorithms to determine who gets boosted and who doesn't. So You've got Elon Musk, he owns X, right? Which I think is the primary method that people use for following the news, for communicating the news. He's got contracts with the Pentagon. He also pushes this far-right ideology that is clearly being boosted by this algorithm. And all these algorithms are private. We don't get to see them, right? Then you have Mark Zuckerberg, who, prior to Trump 2.0 was in the sort of liberal circles and was trying to fact check all the time and align with corporate media outlets to make sure there wasn't fake news, all these things that now he's aligned himself with Trump to curry favor. He's gutted DEI. And, Meta does all kinds of horrible things that are involved in the military industrial complex. And also all of these people are involved in the Israeli genocide. You've got Jeff Bezos and Amazon so many Pentagon contracts there. He owns the Washington Post and literally like has banned critiques of free market ideology at this point. And I could go on and on and on, but what does it mean when our public square, if you will, is controlled by these reactionary billionaires? It's like we don't really have any meaningful free speech, and all of that's tied up in the internet.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I guess America's a weird place, right? Like because there's this talk of democracy, and yet it's that democracy which does exist, on paper. It does exist, especially like on the local level, like the barriers to entry to engage in democracy on a local level, like at your county level or at even your small city level, are pretty open, for people who want to get involved. But on a larger scale, the democracy that exists on paper is in conflict with like the economic, I guess, like oligarchy. The sort of economic, almost totalitarianism that is very undemocratic. It's anti-democratic because most of the resources in this country, and this is not a new thing, have been in control of a small handful of individuals, right? And frequently, the way that the media system has evolved in America is that newspapers and then radio stations, and TV stations were in the control of the small, minority, economic elite minority that controlled the capital, and in America. And so it's always been the case on some level that, our public square, if you will, was, was controlled to a smaller or a larger degree by private interests, very undemocratic, and if you look at the ownership of newspapers, they were like these kind of old school oligarchic families, like, I don't know, I grew up partially in California, and, you have the Hearst sort of family that controlled, big chunk of the media. It's that family made its money on silver mining and all this stuff. And, and you can look at some of the kind of the older sort of families in America that, yeah, newspapers or media is sort of controlled by private interests, and so the internet is really not that much different, except it's these new players, and the internet is like all encompassing in a way, right? Like because we can't really leave it anymore. Everything gets, even if you have a newspaper, let's say, even if you own a newspaper, you still have to deal with the internet. People, it has to be transmitted through the internet. It's shared on these platforms, and so a lot of businesses depend like very centrally, and only and a small handful of companies control everything. Well, before at least you would have regional newspapers, and so people's power wouldn't expand, fully like on a national level or even on an international level, like with companies like Facebook and X and Google and Amazon. These are companies that are not only have national monopolies, here in America, but they monopolize the European markets. They monopolize, pretty much, sort of the American aligned economic system, right? World system. They dominate them, and the only countries that they don't dominate are the ones that are in opposition to sort of this American system, like Russia and China. Primarily. And so, yeah, so I mean, it's messed up. I don't know. It's deeply incompatible with the notion of democracy when you have these guys opaquely determining what gets seen, who gets boosted, who doesn't get boosted. I mean, it gets to the ridiculous level, right? I mean, I think Elon Musk is such an interesting character because he's sort of like so weird and like so drugged up and so like so insecure, and he has to be like in front of the public eye so much that he kind of in a way is indicative of how things actually are, but they're just not said loudly as he says them. I mean, to the point where he like demonetize people who like, I don't know, he like will like say a slightly negative thing about him, like he'll actually have these influencers that he'll, because X, or Twitter has this sort of like subscription thing that's built into it, I guess, that people can subscribe to your content right on kind of like a Substack or something, but on inside Twitter. And like, if he likes you, if you suck up to him and say the things that he wants you to say, I mean, this is like direct, right? To him personally, not like some algorithm that he concocted, but like you say things that he likes, he'll like constantly, retweet you and like, boost you. And so you're going to be just making millions
Yeah.
because he's gonna, put you to the top, and all of his fanboys are gonna like subscribe to you. But then I don't know what he does, but there was this one case, I can't remember even the name of the influencer, but like it was a woman, and she like got like totally demonetized. I mean, her earnings like dropped by like something ridiculous. And so, because I don't remember what the spat was, but he didn't like something she wrote or whatever, but it was like direct.
Yeah.
And so like, but that happens on a kind of systemic way, in a systemic way as well, right? There are certain things get demoted, certain things get promoted. And maybe even like, I don't know, I sometimes have this, like, it's not necessarily, not exactly paranoia, but I think one of the things that they want to happen is not even to like hide content that they don't agree with, but to polarize everything so much that everyone is just like at each other's throats, And so when
Yeah.
everyone's at each other's throats, it's like nothing will change because everyone's too busy fighting with each other, and sort of fully engaged in like the drama or the melodrama of like these superficial kind of fights with each other, right? Like with influencer versus influencer kind of stuff.
Oh, they love to promote that. I mean, I can just tell by like
Those
what
are the
ends up in
biggest
my
things.
For You
Those
page.
make the most money, right? Those make like
Yeah.
that is the biggest thing. Yeah, yeah.
Like there's sometimes like Twitter spots that I'm like, I don't care, but this is
Yeah.
all my entire For You pages. By the way, I was just, when you were explaining that, I was just reminded of what happened to Matt Taibbi.
Yes.
Like he was like I mean, he was everywhere. Him and Elon Musk were like buddies. He was releasing the Twitter files. I mean, you couldn't not have this guy in your feed. And then I can't even remember what it was about. I think it's because like he refused to stop being on Substack or whatever. Elon Musk like disappeared him from Twitter or X or
Yes.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
mean, yeah, it's incredible. And then you're like, that's happening out in the open. And we all suspect we're being like shadow banned. It's like that's so weird. Like my Twitter following like just doesn't grow past a certain amount.
Is yours? Mine is like stopped. Yeah, and it just doesn't. Yeah,
mine is like stuck, and I lose like it's like every time I reach a certain number, it goes back down hundreds. And I'm just like, this makes no sense. Like this can't be real. I mean, whatever. There's nothing I can do about it. But like,
it doesn't really. I sometimes don't like. I notice that too. It's not like I don't really want to talk about it. It's embarrassing, because it's like it's not really that important, in the grand scheme of things. But I think there is some truth to it because I've like, I mean, again, it's like you don't know what's going on, and everyone's kind of made peace with it in a way, and it's like not only made peace with it, like everyone's become an expert in gaming these algorithms. They're trying to figure out, basically testing the algorithm, and especially people whose livelihood depends on this. Like you can sort of put things out, kind of what works, and you're like, oh well, I see. And so there's like a social media entrepreneur that's very cynical about it, that like tries to game these things. I mean, there's all these TikTokers and Instagram people that are doing this all the time. Clearly, there's people on social media, on X and Twitter do the same thing. They kind of see what the topic is or how to talk about a topic that gets you maximum exposure and maximum anger. And it's the anger, really. I think what really is the key, I think, probably like the most nefarious and kind of evil thing about these platforms is that they really are about getting people to hate each other,
Yeah.
I mean, it's key to that, because ultimately, like, I don't know. I mean, and it gets really dark for me, initially when after October 7th, when Israel just started going, full mask off kind of genocide mode, it was just such a disconnect for me because like, I'm just on Twitter, like I'm watching this, there's this horror, just like pouring out of Gaza, just like the things that you like, things that you wouldn't even put like in a horror film, like the kind of, and like, I mean, and yet like, it's like a commercial platform. It's like making money off this stuff. There's like ads underneath this stuff. Then it's like, and I'm like thinking this, like, I is genocide like good for business? Like it must be because it's driving engagement, right? It's like people can't look away. People are angry. People are crying. People are like, in a way.
I mean, look at like it's like the and I've participated in this before because I've gone on a show a couple times, but it's like the Piers Morgan formula, where you like just have like Cenk Uygur and like some crazy Zionist like Shmuley Boteach like shouting at each other, and then it gets like 5 million views, and like those are clicks, and that's just like money for the people running that network.
It's like Jerry Springer, but with genocide. essentially.
Yeah, like you just like exactly like and it's like the equivalent of throwing chairs, except everybody's like, in their
Yeah, yeah,
little, setups like we are. But no, it's really depressing. And then I mean that's one dark side of it. And then there's the even darker side of a lot of these tech giants that we're talking about, which is a few things. I mean, I always think back to like, when we learn about the Nazi Holocaust,
yeah.
it's like, oh, IBM, like was involved and like, and, all these other like corporations that were involved and like shame and never again. And it's like, you look at today and it's not just with Gaza. I mean, you've got Palantir, which is Peter Thiel's company. Is that Peter Thiel's company?
He's back to yeah.
But it's like, yeah. Okay. So you've got Palantir, like helping ICE create create databases for people to deport.
Yeah.
You've got them. They also work on predictive policing, which is like nasty. You've got Microsoft, I believe, is involved in deportations and ICE stuff as well. Amazon is looking to contracts for that as well. And then you've also got like the fact that all of those companies are completely tied into the Israeli genocide machine in various ways. And that's like the most horrific. I mean, you talk about a horror film, like sometimes when I see what's coming out of Gaza, I'm just reminded of the way the Saw movies used to make me feel. Remember those
Yeah.
like series of like ridiculous horror porn
Yeah. Exactly.
movies
Yes.
from, like when I was a teenager? And you've got like all of this is happening with algorithms. You've got them literally like in WhatsApp or Meta is totally invested in that and helping with that as well. I mean, it's really scary.
No. Yeah. What
Go
Israel
ahead,
is
sorry.
doing. No. Yeah. No. I mean, just on the Saw aspect of it, I think it's a great analogy actually, because I mean, Israel is like, in a way, there's this great book. I think it's called the Palestine Laboratory. I can't remember the name of the author. It's like it looks at Israel as like a laboratory for the development
I
of.
think by Anthony Lauenstein, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and it's like an academic book. It's pretty good. I recommend people read it. But we don't need, in a way you can sort of see it in the headlines even, right? I mean, the way that Israel will use these drones. I mean, these are like tech, created by tech companies, powered by software that's created by tech companies, right? I'm not sure what the model of the drone they use for this, but they play the baby sounds, the crying baby sounds to lure Palestinians out, in Gaza out of their homes so they can bomb them. That shit is like, yeah, talking about Saw and talking about the use of of like computer technology to perpetuate mass slaughter, but also in a weird way, like very, very intimate, right? Slaughter, because on one way it's like there's a mass character to it, but it's also intimate because they really like are drawing one person out of the house, or a couple of people out of the house with their fake cries, right? And then they kill them. Yeah, because they use people's empathy as a weapon against them, like, isn't it? And it's
And
like that
then they force, just to add to that, then they force all of us around the world to watch this,
yes,
like
it's
on the social media applications they own. And we are helpless to do anything about it. We're just like
yeah.
watching people be mass slaughtered and starved.
No, that is the premise of that movie, right? I mean, it's that guy that gets off on like torturing people and watching it on, and then sort of in a way basically and kind of flaunting the fact that they are all powerful and are watching. And I mean, it is a sadistic, like extremely sociopathic and like exhibitionist kind of way of doing genocide. It's really, I mean, I think it's, I mean, like talk about IBM. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, IBM helped, Germany basically run the genocide machine much more efficiently, to some degree, it wasn't even like present in all aspects of the operation, it was a pretty small part of it. But like the fact that, IBM was involved in it, people are still shocked by it, right? And yet here you have Google involved in essentially, yeah, like, doing AI targeting, picking targets to kill in Gaza, like, and that's like that's some guy in Palo Alto, taking his like e-bike to work, sitting in a cubicle, having his like fair trade coffee, um, dropping off his kids at some private school, like a Montessori school or something, and then like sitting down and like coding on this shit, like it's right, like it's fucking crazy to me, and it's I'm sure, like, I'm not different than a lot of it's been kind of driving me nuts, like knowing that, like, like how interwoven this stuff is in the normalcy of life in America, and like this is just not even no one even thinks it's weird, and it's like the people who actually protested this inside the company. I think a lot of them got fired, ultimately.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I was kind of mocking some of this, when the Google when the protest against Google happened. Like I think this was like 2018 maybe, when initially it was leaked that Google was bidding on an AI like contract for the Pentagon, basically doing, I think, similar things that it's doing in Israel, essentially helping pick targets with America's drone program. There was protests, and then there was a couple of people, a small minority in Google that was against it. And I was like a little bit dismissive of their concerns back then, because I was like, look, what do you think Google does? What is
Yeah.
Google? Google is not, Google has been intertwined. I mean, Google is actually, if you want to get like, even more conspiratorial, some of the money for the research that became Google in Stanford, it was like a graduate program, research program, was funded by the federal government. It was funded by, there was a DARPA grant, it was part of like a larger kind of a law enforcement focused federal initiative that wanted to develop technologies that could help basically American law enforcement organize information better, like to search through information better. And that's what, the
That's what
initial
they're
kind
doing.
of, yeah, like kind of very smart kind of way of indexing the web and figuring out which web pages are the most are the most popular through, how many people link to a website. Right? I mean, that was like the initial genius of the Google guys. I mean, they said like, wait a second, what we can do is we can count how many websites link to this website, and then determine its page rank, based on that. So like basically, if more people, link to something, that means it's more relevant, it's like more popular, so it's a good
Yeah.
result, right? It's like vetted or whatever, and so that was the thing that made them, that's what made them billionaires, and so, but that thing was funded through a federal, like program, essentially law enforcement related, and so all of this stuff comes out of that. And Google had been involved very early with like American empire. It was involved in like spy satellites. It's sort of Google Earth technology was immediately used for military. There was like a military version of it that was used
Wow.
during the Iraq War. Like, so like, I mean, this is like 2003. So Google was very young back then. It had just launched um, Gmail, like a Gmail. I think it was 2003 or 2004.
Sorry, real quick.
Yeah,
What's so funny about all this, or ironic? It's not funny, but it's ironic. Is like all of these techie people have this such like a libertarian bent.
yeah,
Like they're so anti-state and like, freedom of the marketplace and like get the state out of this. But the irony of it all is they are completely embedded and in large part funded by the state
yeah,
and participate in all the like state violence and surveillance that like the techie libertarian types are
yeah.
like so against.
I
And
mean,
I mean,
yeah.
it's kind of like a genius. Sorry, it's just like a part of that genius
No,
sort of marketing of like the tech stuff.
I mean, I think a lot of them do believe it, because I think, there's like, people aren't logical. We're not like computers, right? So we have like these, I don't know, models that we have in our brain about, how about ourselves, about how we think the world works, about what we consider to be like a coercive part of the state, what we consider to be not a coercive part of the state, like, I mean, it even goes further, like basically all computer science departments, right? So in America, like all of, let's say, major institutions, universities, like, Berkeley, Stanford, let's say MIT, these are like big computer science departments. They were involved in the development of the internet. A lot of these guys, I mean, all of those things were essentially created with federal funding, and essentially defense funding, because computer science was seen as a strategic, a field of strategic importance. It had national security, primarily national security, that dimension to it, because America needed to develop, advanced weapons and advanced computer weapons, and so it was like the actual like foundation of the entire field of computer science in America is connected to like the empire or connected to the military. So it's like, it goes on even on a deeper level. I mean, and it kind of does make sense, right? I mean, if you are a country that's so, obsessed with security and, and expansion and like national security plays a huge role in, in everything that you do. And so it's not surprising that something like computer science will have state, state involvement on a very, very deep level. And the state and the interest of the state or the interest of the empire are guiding the direction in which, research is happening. They're guiding,
Yeah.
the federal government controls the funding, right? So they fund certain projects. They have certain plans for what the government wants or what the military wants, and these are like long-term plans. And then they'll fund, projects that go in that direction. So it's not like a hands-off thing. It's not like, oh, here's some money, do some cool stuff, and hopefully we'll use something, that you come up with. There's an aspect of that, but it's within like a framework that is actually pretty directed, and it's there's control. So it's like, yeah, I agree. It's ridiculous. And so on some level, you have people like Peter Thiel and, this guy Palmer Luckey, who's like the new face of Silicon Valley. It's like he's like a, patriot, and he wants to create these basically autonomous sort of, like weapon systems like drones that are just powered by AI and all this stuff, right? Completely like hands off kind of military. There was a 60 Minutes, I think, segment that came out a couple of days ago that, basically profiled him and his company, also backed by Peter Thiel and others, that wants to basically completely, they're open about it. They're not hiding it. Whereas like Google back in the day in the Obama years was very, very uncomfortable being open, talking like this, because back then, I think there's actually, if I can rant for a little, another
Yeah,
minute about
please.
it,
Please.
I think there's actually kind of an economic component to the difference you're seeing in like tone and posture from the Silicon Valley people that I think is important to note. And then it's this: in the Obama years, right? Like it was the internet or these internet companies, like I guess like the Bush years, but really in the Obama years, the internet was still kind of utopian. And even the people who ran like these internet companies, like the people at Google, the people at Facebook, they believed that they would be able to conquer the world, right? Like Google had, like basically had a big presence in Russia, let's say, right? So it didn't monopolize the market there because Russia has its own kind of homemade Google that's very good and maybe some say even better. But basically, there's a Russian Google called Yandex. So like Google was there, but it wasn't like it's the sole entity like it is in America or in Europe. But, Facebook was there. So like Facebook and Google, let's just take them as examples. They had almost conquered the entire world. They're all over the world. They're in every country except China, And so they believed that essentially, like with enough pressure, with enough American pressure, with enough they would like conquer the world, that the world was open to them. And in a way, they haven't been able to do that. And they've been kind of rolled back even a little bit because Facebook use and Google use in China and in Russia has been plummeting because of the war in Ukraine and because Russia itself is sort of clamping down on sort of foreign networks, and foreign companies in the internet space. China is obviously not letting these companies in. And so there's a kind of, it was in the interests of these companies, people who were in charge of these companies in the Obama years, to play this kind of global citizen role, like to distance themselves from the empire, right? To per se, like, no, we're just Google. We're like not connected to the military or to the American government, really.
We're not American. Yeah. We're just like, here to help
We just want
everyone.
to connect the world. We just want to be useful to the world. And so, because at that time they were actively trying to seek foreign markets in Russia and in China, right? And so there was
Yeah.
this kind of game that they were playing where they didn't want to, like, basically, be so intertwined publicly. I mean, China understood what was happening from the very beginning, and so it wasn't like. But still, I feel like they were, there was pressure for them to play that role, right? To not just be overt about their connection to American power, even though
Yeah.
behind the scenes the relationship was deep and deepening with every year. But that's sort of the publicly facing. They wouldn't stand with like where they wouldn't talk about needing to defend America and helping defend America. They'd do it, but they wouldn't talk about it. So they were embarrassed by it. So these revelations of Google working with the Pentagon to develop AI, that would target, kill people. it was sort of an embarrassment. They like tried to kind of like they made, you know, they kind of made some concessions, although they never really canceled the contract. You know, when all this stuff came out, you know, no, it was sort of it was like their dirty laundry they didn't want to air, but that era has come to an end, right? In a way, you're seeing both the Democratic Party and you know, the Republican Party and big chunks of like the business elite. They kind of understand that, like, no, that's it. Like, China is not letting us in. China is sort of like is kind of going its own way, and there is like this opposition. So the line has been drawn in the sand, right? And so these companies have nothing to lose to align openly with American power, right? There is nothing to lose, because it's not like they're going to get access to markets, or they're going to try to either you're with us or you're against us. And if you're with us, you know, we're with you, and if you're against us, we're going to try to defeat you and try to like force ourselves on you, right? Like a bunch of creepy rapists.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.